So in this segment, we're going to be talking about a Telegraph writer wishing Jacob Rees Mogg good luck searching for Brexit opportunities in the city. Now, this article does get quite techy with a lot of specifics around the financial industries, and so it is a bit difficult for me to explain all this stuff because I'm no expert in the field of finance. So yeah, but I'll do my best to try and break down things as much as possible and kind of rather than getting dragged into specifics, talk about some of the things the writer is talking about in terms of their little to no Brexit benefits for the City of London. So, dear Jacob, I write in reply to your rousing exhortation in the Sun newspaper from the public to let you know about any absurd EU regulations that should be abolished, an appeal which, if I'm completely honest, I don't quite understand. For the majority of this article is very easy to understand. It's just when the writer goes into specifics, it feels more like an FT article. Let's leave aside the question of whether or not this was an exercise that should have been undertaken before we left the European Union. You write that the opportunities in front of us are immense. Now you're asking the great British public to illuminate as to what they are. So, you said it's very easy, Brexit's easy, going to be great, there's so much stuff we can do, and now you're asking people for help with your homework. I mean, it's pretty embarrassing. If these opportunities were so large, surely they'd be quite obvious. Why do you need to crowdsource them? Why are you asking people to help you with your homework, man? It's a bit embarrassing, to be honest, especially for a government minister. No doubt there are various pernickety rules and regulations that can be usefully repealed, but it does not seem likely that you'll be alerted to some massive piece of legislation that is seriously hampering our economy and about which those in Westminster were previously unaware. And you might be able to get rid of some bits that are annoying, like make tweaks to bits of regulations, but to make wholesale changes is very unlikely unless you want to cause huge problems in the financial sector. The author says, perhaps I will be proved wrong. I don't, however, have any suggestions for you, I'm afraid. The purpose of this letter is to sound a note of caution. One of the areas that is very often near the top of wish lists for Brexit opportunities alongside free ports is financial regulations. Free ports are simply not going to work out. Just as the UK could and in fact did create free ports while in the UK, whilst in the EU, which is true. David Cameron got rid of some of them because free ports aren't always a good idea. The truth is that there are very few easy ways in which to liberate the city, just because there is no longer under the purview of Brussels. If they were so easy, they would have mentioned them during the referendum. They didn't. All they did was talk about, in broad strokes, regulations and bureaucracy. Many of the most important financial regulations are drawn up at a global level these days. With New York, the Americans involved, with the Japanese involved, and other sort of stakeholders, because no one really wants to see another financial crash. Very often they are then gold-plated by the UK watchdog, so I'm assuming he means the UK kind of goes above and beyond to implement them and does further things to make them stronger. I know you think that the EU is a bureaucratic nightmare, but its interpretation of the very same rules can be more lenient than ours, and he does talk about these things in specifics. This is frustrating for the city, but also understandable. If something goes wrong in the UK, it's going to cause a proportionally bigger mess because of our outsized financial industry, because the City of London is mainly based around financial services, which the UK is a major player of, or at least was a major player of globally. The EU are trying to claw back some of that with changes around clearing houses. But again, the UK has such a disproportionate amount of clearing houses compared to other EU member states that the EU increased the deadline to get clearing houses out of London from this year, the summer of 2022 to 2025. That's how big our kind of financial might is, with clearing houses and other things. So it does tell you how if there is some sort of financial meltdown in the city, it gets very bad in the UK. Hence why one of the reasons why the '08 crash was so bad in the UK. The first are the Solvency II rules for the insurance industry, which again, he goes into specifics here, and I did try to figure out what he was talking about. I did find it quite difficult. This gives local regulators the power to decide how companies should calculate their long-dated liabilities on things like annuities they sell. These are things, I did Google this one I actually understood. So an annuity converts your savings into an annual savings into a pension, giving you a guaranteed income for life. So essentially, you change your sort of savings, your life savings, into a pension, which you will take out once you're older. The British use something called matching adjustment, the French use something called volatility adjuster, and the Germans use yield curve extrapolation. What a word. The exact differences between these calculations are complex, so the writer doesn't really talk about them too much because I think you'd get quite very, very specific, which would be a nightmare for any reader, as well as probably him to explain it. But the point is that the EU typically sets out directives and it's up to member states to implement them. So maybe the EU put out a directive around pensions, and then each country is like, okay, this is how we want to implement it. And, France, the UK, and Germany use different systems. According to British insurance executives, matching adjustments are far more stringent than the French or the German formula. So the UK one is far more stringent. And that's one of the things Rees Mogg and other, I think, members of the Tory party talked about, is changing the rules around pensions so that it's easier for pension companies, companies that hold people's pensions, to invest and therefore increase their pension amounts, but also investment in the UK. Now, it very much, by the looks of things, felt like we could have already done some of this stuff whilst we're members of the EU, given that the British rules around investment are far more stringent than the ones in other EU member states. So this was the rules around Solvency II. It was one of the main reasons why UK insurers sold off most of their European businesses by 2016 when Solvency II was implemented. They simply couldn't compete with local players like France's AXA and Germany's Allianz. Brexit happened early for the insurance industry. Now, at the time, these companies wouldn't have known what kind of Brexit we had gone for, so I'm assuming that these insurance companies struggled to compete with the French and German companies because of the differences in rules in those countries compared to the UK ones. Maybe that they would have to change so much of their investment schemes, or they would have to set up subsidiaries in order to compete with these different companies in different countries because of the differences in rules in them. Brexit happened early for the insurance industry. Something similar is playing out with Basel III, or Basel III, depending on how you want to pronounce that. Not going to fight anyone over that. The international regulatory framework that is designed to ensure big banks don't cause the kind of problems they did in 2008. Brussels had said European banks don't need to set aside capital or more capital when they lend to companies that don't have a credit rating, as things stand UK banks do. So for UK banks to, UK banks have to set aside more capital when they lend to companies that don't have a credit rating, because if you don't have a credit rating, it's going to be very hard to establish how kind of secure you are as a company. So the UK banks have to set aside more capital to lend to these companies just in case the investments don't work out, the loans don't work out, and the UK companies don't need a bailout. So the UK actually has more stringent rules than other EU countries to deal with this. I think that's as a result of the 2008 crash being far worse in the UK for the financial sector anyways than it was in other countries. This means it will be cheaper for European banks to lend to many clients, even British ones. Divergence can, it seems, work both ways, and the fact is here, the rules, the red tape in the City of London was far more aggressive than the ones in other countries because of the fear around a collapse in the UK. So that shows you that we actually did have some leeway whilst we were members of the EU around financial services. We just never took them. For better or worse, if you want to argue that the UK should have higher regulatory standards because of the size of the City of London, fine. But at the same time, EU member states clearly governed in a way that was more suited to them and has benefited them in other ways and had made them more competitive than the UK in some regards. There are certainly things we can and should be doing in nascent areas like digital assets in the hope of staying ahead of the pack. So I guess that would be changes around maybe cryptos, NFTs and things like that, derivatives, etc. Sunak is also looking at making listing rules less onerous in order to stop big tech companies from automatically heading to Nasdaq. So that would be Nasdaq. So that would be the US. We should also be looking to build on the city's traditional strengths in derivatives trading. And again, Sunak looking at ways to make listing rules less onerous. So he's going to make it easier for tech companies to go onto the stock exchange so they stop going to America as much. I mean, is that going to work? I don't know. If that's the best he's got, then I'd be concerned. We should also be looking at ways to build on the city's traditional strengths in derivatives trading. But the problem is, as you know, clearing houses and other things are being pushed to move to the EU in order to keep trading and to trade essentially with the big players. The UK are going to struggle with our traditional strengths like derivative trades, because that stuff's going to move over to the EU. That's something we'll talk about in a separate video. I've got that one lined up at a later date. Solvency 2 definitely isn't perfect. For example, the Bank of England has admitted that risk margin, the cost of transferring insurance obligations to a third party should an insurer fail, is too high. So essentially he's saying like the amount of maybe funds you would need is too high given the low levels of interest rates. But the thing is, the Bank of England, rightly or wrongly, and in my opinion wrongly, are looking at increasing interest rates. Tweaks could be made to ensure insurers can more easily invest in infrastructure assets in the UK, which is fine. But again, did Brexit have to happen for this to be allowed? I don't think so. But I'm sure addressing all of this will counter the cost and hassle of Brexit for the city, which has largely been ignored during the UK's protracted negotiations with Brussels. And again, they did completely ignore the City of London, despite it being a key thing in the UK. The financial sector is very strong in the UK. It was completely ignored by Johnson. Instead, he went for fishing and other things, which again he botched anyways. Last November, as I'm sure you're aware, the Treasury gave the UK's two main city watchdogs, the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, and the Prudential Regulations Authority, the PRA, a dual mandate. Their main goal remains financial stability, but have been also tasked with boosting growth, which again is kind of two things at odds with each other. Boosting stability and boosting growth are two very difficult things to do together. Typically, you need financial stability, which can hinder growth, but it's a more sustainable growth and more stable growth. That's typically how it goes. So the UK are going to have a tough gig here to do this, especially since some financial institutions, some banks set up shop in the UK because of our kind of more stringent rules to kind of avoid the worst instincts of bankers that can lead to financial crashes. Yes, it is possible to make rules more efficient and achieve both objectives. However, this is painstaking and often incremental work that will be extremely hard to present as a Brexit win, especially when, by the looks of things, we could have done some of this as members of the EU, but you're going to have to look at very large pieces of legislation and look at what you can trim down, which would be very difficult, time-consuming to do. More often, big rule changes involve a trade-off between growth and stability. What's more, the pros and cons can be incredibly hard to quantify. If you tell the ordinary person we've got rid of this bit of financial ruling, they're going to be like, I didn't even know that existed. You might be able to argue in broad strokes that, we cut red tape for the financial industry so it can invest more, and people might be like, yeah, and they'll be like, what does that mean? It's going to be hard to present wins here. The idea the city has been hogtied with EU red tape that can be slashed and thrown on bonfires is, I'm afraid, simplistic to the point of sophistry, which is true. That the argument that the City of London will thrive because we can cut all this red tape and stuff simply doesn't make sense, especially when we had more stringent rules than other EU member states, and still companies came to set up shop here and do trades here. It's just ridiculous to argue the EU held back the City of London. The EU helped the City of London flourish. My worry is that in attempting to come up with something flashy that can be dressed up as a Brexit benefit, this government will get rid of rules that are actually quite useful, which could lead to a further financial crash. Big bangs can, unless handled with extreme caution, cause quite a mess. And that's the thing where if the UK goes down this path of deregulation, we're going to struggle, and when the next financial collapse happens, we'll be in a far more weakened state. So overall, you're going to find it very difficult to find Brexit wins in the City of London. Very, very difficult. And the simple fact is, with more clearinghouses leaving to go to the EU, which they're going to be under a lot of pressure to do so, where are these Brexit wins going to come from for the financial industry? Deregulation, maybe you can convince more people to set up shop here. But again, that might be quite difficult, especially when bankers and other companies will, go to their worst edges and start making bad casino capitalist bets. And, sure, it's great. You might make it easier for tech companies to go onto the UK stock exchange. What happens when these companies get bigger and want to set up shop in the US? A much bigger stock exchange. What happens then? They're just going to move. they'll use us as a stepping stone to get there. How much will that benefit the UK? So, anyways, I know that this article's a bit techy in places and may be quite confusing, but the main gist of the article is that yes, you might be able to trim down some bits of legislation, but you're not going to get gigantic wins here, and this will not benefit the City of London compared to the damage Brexit has done to the City of London and the financial sector in the UK. So, anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully, I made sense in this video. Hopefully, you guys understood what I was trying to say, but overall, not a great situation for the financial sector in the UK. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.